the year of truth for the Paris Agreement, I said many times last year, and that was all turned upside down by the coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic. Initially, we were quite worried that that would move all attention away from climate, that it would take all the budgets away from climate, and that nobody would be interested in climate anymore. But of course, we are finding now from surveys from people that are coming out of the COVID crisis that people are actually quite interested, maybe more aware of sustainability issues than before, and that people are indicating that they would like to see climate action as part of COVID recovery. And this afternoon, I think we're having some excellent examples of Green New Deals. Some of them maybe developed before the corona crisis, but applied to both a green recovery from the corona crisis and to climate action. Demonstrating for us in the Green Growth Institute that indeed green growth is the approach to address both growth in the economy that we need, but in a sustainable manner, dealing with the COVID as well as the climate crisis. So with that, we're very happy to have you here, and I think we have a very good lineup of speakers, both in the room. But we begin with a speaker that is also online, the Dutch climate envoy, Marcel Beukeboom, who will speak live to us from the Netherlands. The Hague, are you ready? If he is in The Hague. So I'm just waiting for magic to happen. There he is. So I hand over to Marcel. Marcel, please go ahead.
Audio.
Marcel, I don't know if you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. So we need to turn on the volume here, whoever does that, who is in charge of the technology. Magically.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Please start again.
Is this better? All right. Well, thanks, Frank. Good to see you. You're actually the only one I can see, because for the rest I'm looking at myself. But I think the way that you have organized this with people at home, people in the room, people across the globe, illustrates what we can do, and that we can still cooperate with a large distance between ourselves in this new time. And I think that that is very necessary. As you have said in your introduction, climate change doesn't go away. And climate change is such a global public good that can only be solved by international cooperation. So we need more of this, and we need to reinvent ourselves as well in the way that we do cooperate. And I think in a way we are lucky that we do have all these technologies that we can actually do that. As you have also said in your introduction, COVID-19 has perhaps stopped us in our ways a little bit. It has moved the attention away from climate, but climate change itself didn't go away. And I think we have even seen a little glimpse of the future as well, of what is possible and also of what we are capable of by taking the same actions, similar actions across the globe. It's actually amazing what has happened, that in a matter of weeks, the whole world united around similar kinds of policy measures, and people obeyed, and people actually took their own initiatives to do something about this. So that in a way gives hope that it is possible, that such a cooperation is possible across the globe. What we have heard as well in the same time is people using terms, and those I think were the hopefuls, using terms of a pause or a reset. I'm actually not in favor of the use of such terms, as it makes me think of also computer language. When you have problems with your computer, you push the reset button as well, and it goes back to its factory settings. And that is not what we need. we don't need a system with the same characteristics of the one that we knew before the crisis. We need to reinvent many elements of it. And that is something that doesn't require a reset. That is something that, as the Secretary General of the United Nations said, we need to recover better. We have to build back better. And that is an enormous task, and that is something that we can only do together. And looking at the first initial steps in the recovery, there are not many signs actually that make me hopeful. Bloomberg figured out that of the 1,200 billion of initial stimulus packages that have been initiated, only 18 billion could be labeled as green, and that is less than 1%. So our old habits are very difficult to die out. So we really have to do more, and we really have to understand why it is that we just fall back on those old habits. And it's difficult to understand why we do it this way. As central bankers call for a green recovery. Just last Friday in The Guardian, an article of Mark Carney, Frank Alderson, the Dutch chair of the Network for Greening the Financial System, called for that. We know the new climate economy, I think something that the GGGI also worked on, also called for a greener recovery, and using the terms of the old economy, saying it is actually cheaper and more profitable to invest in green than in brown or black. And just also last year, the GCA, the Global Center on Adaptation, said investing now in good adaptation measures is up to 7 times cheaper than waiting for several decades, as we are still trying to do. Another thing that you referred to, Frank, in your introduction was what do populations think? One part of the analysis could be that politicians are a little bit hesitant to take green measures because they fear that it's going too fast and they will be punished in the next elections. But there are several polls, and you referred to that state the opposite. We are actually seeing a growing awareness amongst populations that we should do better. We should take care of our environment, of biodiversity, and of the climate. So there is hope. And as a climate diplomat, my life has changed as well. I had to adapt myself. You referred to the postponement of the COP to November next year. But basically all international meetings have been postponed. So we have to think of different ways to cooperate. And one way to cooperate in a different way is by coalitions. And I'm just mentioning one here that could serve as an example in your discussions later on as well. That is the Powering Past Coal Alliance. That is an alliance just focusing on one element of our economy, and that is coal-fired power plants, the use of coal, investments in coal, pledging to get out of it, but also with all its members, over 100 already, to share ideas and help each other to think of different ways to generate energy and to invest. The South Chungcheong province in Korea is already a member. I think it would be very good if the Republic of Korea would become the first country in Asia joining the alliance, as such being a leader in the region, but I think also a leader in the G20 on climate. And with that, I wish, and I think I gave a few examples of what is going on already. Central bankers, the UN Secretary General, investors, but also young people marching the streets, populations having bigger awareness on climate change. All the signs and all the signals are there. Also for Korea to do it again and become again the green tiger, the tiger in Asia, and having started with a plea for cooperation. I think I can say on behalf of the Netherlands, but also on behalf of the colleagues in the EU, that we stand ready to join Korea on that pathway. So hopefully we can build back better. And I wish you a good seminar today, and I will stay on to discuss some of these elements later with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. Emphasizing we have to build back better, but also noting that that first wave, that very large wave of emergency rescue packages contained only a very small share of green, 1% according to one analysis. So in the next stage, where we are talking about recovery or Green New Deals, we have a second chance to do better than that. So our next speaker, Ambassador Michael Reiterer, who's currently installing his microphone, will speak to us about the EU's Green New Deal. And indeed, the EU's Green Recovery Package has been built on the back of the Green New Deal. I've even seen that it was built as the largest Green Deal in the world. So, Ambassador Reiterer, please come up and tell us more.
Well, thank you very much, Frank, for the invitation, also Joanna, and also already saying one of the most important things. Yes, we are trying to have the biggest Green Deal, and I hope that in the not so distant future there will be more big Green Deals, and I think this is a competition which is worthwhile. I'm not saying we are the first, we are the best, but I think we should try to show the direction. And I'm thankful that I have seen that the Green Deal drop has fallen in Korea. It was introduced in the election campaign, late, but it was introduced. And the Korean Green Deal is hopefully now reality. It was only the Korean New Deal, but after some shuffling and interventions and reminders, the Green made it in the Korean deal. And we are inviting Korea to work with us in order to implement it in a broad manner. What I would like to show you in this presentation is that the new Green Deal is not a document which should be handed over to the Ministry of Environment and saying, please take care of that. That's not the Green Deal. It's a comprehensive program. It's a program which, in the times of COVID, should be a program to help us to overcome the challenge of the keep going. I think that was the invitation. Keep going with the Green Deal. Higher? Okay, this is a green microphone which has to go on the green tie, I guess. And the challenge which we face with COVID, of course, is that we started off with a virus which was so small that our eyes cannot see it, but it has to become an economic crisis so big that we simply cannot miss it, and most important, we cannot overcome it alone. So we must prepare plans for the economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic in making sure that all the money and the billions and trillions, whatever the currency is, are spent wisely and that they are spent in a clever manner. We are already spending the money, and therefore we should make sure that we are not spending it on the black economy, on the old economy, but we spend it on the green economy. And that's the idea the European Union had, I must say, already before the crisis. Because last year, the new government of the European Commission was elected on this program. And we have seen in the last elections in Parliament, the big winners were the Green parties. and the Green Party accepted the candidacy of the President for the European Commission on a green program. And this blueprint, which was then presented, developed, and accepted, should make sure that by 2050 we have a climate neutral Europe. We have said from the beginning, this is a growth strategy. A growth strategy which should also be helpful in preserving our environment. That's the second element. And the citizens demand that we do more and that we live up to our promises. To do so, put forward what we call law in March 2020. You know, the European Union is an institution which likes rules, regulations, laws. But the advantage is, once you have agreed, you have to implement it, and if you don't implement, you can go to court. So this is something, I think, which has a certain symbol also for the rest of the world, that if you are committed, you are not only committed politically, but that you are also committed legally. But we are also perfectly aware that if you get into a transition, it would be a lie to say that in a transition you have only winners. No. You also have losers. And if somebody is losing his or her job in the interest of a green economy, the person concerned will not understand you. Therefore, you have to create from the outset a system which also takes care of the losers. You have to make sure that there's a fair transition for the people concerned, and also for all the economic cooperators whom you would like to have on board. Because what they are looking for is predictability. If they invest, they want to make sure that they can get return on the investment. And our message is that the green economy is not a measure to the detriment of the economy, but it is meant to support and to offer new opportunities. So when we are committed by 2030 to cut at least 50%, and if possible 55%, then this is a figure. But the figure has to be explained to the people in concrete actions. And therefore, we have to make sure that we explain, and on the other hand, in our system, that we introduce all the legal bills in order to move forward. Decarbonization in the use of energy is critical to reach by 2030 and 50. And therefore, we have to be working on different sectors of our society, whether it's energy, it's buildings, it's industry, it's mobility. And especially the energy sector is important. We have to work towards a massive electrification based on 80% of renewable sources, complemented by further efforts to decarbonize, namely gas, and continue the phasing out of coal across the European Union. And speaking here in Korea, I would underline that this is also a policy goal which we hope that Korea will subscribe to rather quickly. Renewable energy sources will play an essential role. And again, speaking in Korea, this is an area where Korea has to invest a lot. If I look at the statistics of the OECD, Korea is number one from the bottom. And I think that's not what Korea likes. So I put the challenge to you to become number one from the beginning. Essential is transport. Transport accounts for 1/4 of the EU's greenhouse gas emissions, still growing. Except with the pandemic, we had for the first time a decrease. A 90% reduction in transport emissions is needed by 2050. 90% is a lot. And you can only achieve that if you invest in research, and if you put out the right incentives for the industry, but also for the consumers. The more demand by the consumers, the more efforts by the industry. So smart mobility is a concept which we need. And we will also have to provide the right infrastructure. I came today with my electric car. But if I talk to my drivers, they always say, it's not easy to recharge it. So the infrastructure is essential. And I think we also have to make a decision. We will not be able to have 3 or 4 systems in parallel. The traditional one, the electric one, the LPGs, and perhaps hydro. I think this will be a decision which has to be taken rather quickly, that the investment goes in one direction and in the right directions. We also have to take care of biodiversity. I think this is an issue which was overlooked for a long time. But climate change also has the effect that many species are simply disappearing. And it also has the effect that the room, the space, which is assigned to animals and which is assigned to humans is becoming smaller and smaller. And that's also one of the reasons why our friend, the virus, has jumped from animals to humans. This is an aspect which we will have to figure into our planning in order to make sure that we don't get into a repetition. Obviously, we haven't learned our lessons yet. Because when you MERS last time, there was a discussion that it came from bats and also camels. And now we have the same discussion again a few years ago, and we all looked very surprised at the beginning of the year. So there is something wrong. There's something to learn. And if there's something wrong with the learning, there's something wrong with policy making, because these two go in hand. Therefore, coming up with a new circular economy is essential, and we have also came up in 20 of this year an action plan which is actually transforming the good, hopefully good ideas into reality. Another element which is important is food. We have this program which we call now EU Farm to Fork Strategy, which reflects an increased level of ambition to reduce significantly the use and of chemicals, pesticides, and antibiotics. Normally, if I put in front of you a lot of pills, antibiotics, and say, please eat them, you would probably refuse without a prescription or a good reason. If I put in front of you meat, and you like the steak, you might not be aware that you have eaten quite some antibiotics. Similarly, we can make this experience with fish. We have microplastics more and more in the oceans. The fish eat plastics. We eat fish. We eat plastic. Would you make a conscious decision to eat plastic? So I think one has to get these consequences clearly spelled out. Well, pollution-free environment is, of course, a dream, because whatever we do, there is a certain degree of pollution. But we can make sure that we reduce it, and reduce it to a level which is sustainable. And if we make ourselves clear that about 24 billion euros a year are linked with this, we could spend that money in a much more efficient manner. We also need not only food, but we also need fresh water, clean air, and shelter. All that is part of a new Green Deal, and I'm always surprised when I give this speech that what the hell is new about preaching that we need air that we need food, that we need fresh water, and that we need shelter. This is something which should be common for each and every of us. But nevertheless, it seems not to be the case. Therefore, we have to come up with an EU biodiversity strategy and a strategy for the oceans, which I have mentioned. We need a convention on biological diversity. All that in order to get international cooperation going. We need investment. Therefore, we have an investment plan. Again, when we were drawing up that plan last year, we were impressed by €1 trillion, and we thought we have done a fantastic job in coming up with that. Well, in the COVID crisis, $1 trillion, well, it's some money, but now we are talking about 2.4 trillion to invest to overcome the COVID crisis. So there you also see a certain relativity. The urgency of the COVID crisis is understood by everybody, and now we are able to use and get money. Last year and the years before, when we were preaching about the necessity to fight climate change, well, we had some success, but moderate success. If I compare it, how much money in a short time around the globe could be organized. And I think this is also something which we should have in mind. Another aspect which is often overlooked is the importance of green finance. Green finance is one of the possibilities to have a quick impact. Because if the big investment funds don't invest in companies which don't have a green label, then you would see that the whole economy is moving. And I think this is something which is important and where we are working on. But there you need also scientific criteria to define what is green investment. So the European Banking Institute is helping us in defining these criteria. And we have also set up the International Platform on Sustainable Finance already in 2019 to scale up the mobilization of private capital towards environmentally sustainable investments. This forum is to coordinate an approach and initiative for the capital markets. And there I would like to encourage Korea to join us on that platform. Last time I gave this speech about sustainable finance, I was showing the Green Deal. So we have changed for the occasion, our flag. Blue became green. And I think this is something which is easy to remember. One of the last elements I would like to touch upon is research. We have decided already last year that 35% of our research budget should be devoted for new solutions for climate. So that's, if you take into consideration that Horizon Europe will be the largest program financing research worldwide, so it's quite a lot of money. Also, looking back now from the COVID perspective, it has shrunk a little bit, but it is still an important element. We also have now to adopt, and that's what we have done, I think, relatively quickly, in order to make sure that COVID and Green Deal go together. And there we changed the name a little bit and saying, well, we have to think about the next generations. So the next generations, they should have the possibility to benefit from this huge investment which we make, because they will have the burden of paying back all the debts we are making right now. There is nothing like a free lunch, and there's nothing like a free investment. Somebody has to pay back, and somebody has to earn that money. So next generation EU is an important element. We have put together as a proposal, and I hope it will be accepted, 750 billion. 500 billion should be given as a grant, 250 billion should be given as loans, and to invest it specifically in order to achieve our goals. And there are very practical things, and I will finish with some practical examples. If you tell people that the Earth is stopping tomorrow, they are not impressed anymore. Since the Club of Rome has started to produce regularly reports, unfortunately, urgent as the reports are, and IPCC is doing a very great job, people don't react to them. So you have, I think, to change the messaging and telling what is the chance, what are the possibilities, what are the opportunities, and what can you do concretely. I trust the Institute here is isolating well the windows. This is a banal example, but this is something which hits everybody of us. We are living somewhere and we are working somewhere. And if we cool in the summer out of the window, and in winter all the heat is getting out of the window without us being warm, then something is wrong. And this is one of the issues which has become the easiest in theory to do. Isolation is, next to greening traffic, one of the main issues where everybody can contribute relatively easily, and it would not be necessary to study rocket science for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. That's our Green Deal, and that's our program for the next generation, for the future generations, and these things go together very well.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Master Reiter. It's great to see your passion for green. I think you are the EU ambassador, but it would be easy to also appoint you as green growth ambassador. You did a great job. It did take a little time, of course, but we could see that you wanted to share from all of your messages. We're in Korea, so we like to keep time. I already was getting messages from our organizers. Stick with time, speakers. But we have a few very good speakers. The next one is Dr. Kim Soo-moo, who is the head of the Environment and Energy Institute of Kim and Chang. And he will give us a bit of a private perspective inside. Please, Dr. Kim, I invite you.
앞으로 그게 뒤로 밑에가
나와야 될 텐데. Here you go. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really great honor for me to be invited in this meaningful and timely event. Thank the Netherlands Embassy and all the hosts in the European embassies, the ambassadors, for giving us a chance to speak on the climate transition in Korea from Korean perspective and especially from Korean industry perspective. I'm Sung-woo Kim. I'm environmental expert from Kim and Chang, which is the biggest law firm in Korea, and we do have the dedicated team for environment and climate change, which I belong to. Well, I'll just start my presentation by just talking about the fine dust first, because that matters more than climate change to various stakeholders in Korean society. Last year, there were 7 consecutive bad days of fine dust, and the people really recognize the relationship between air quality and their own health. So the relationship between those two really gives a good recognition for shareholders in this society to think about air quality, not only fine dust, but also climate change. Because the climate change is well related to fine dust, since those two have same sources, which is the fossil fuel, and also the climate change exacerbates fine dust by weakening atmospheric circulation, so that worsening the fine dust as well. So when I teach or when I speak to the CEOs, I brought up the topic of fine dust first, and then change that into the climate change to make the message more persuasive. Well, the Korea, as you know, our industrial structure is energy-intensive industrial structure. So it's not easy for us to just change from A to B in a day. But if we are successful, it will be good precedent for many developing countries who have similar industrial structure. Recently, we have 3 green signals from outside of the country and from inside of the country from various stakeholders related to the green. And the first one would be carbon, and second signal would be renewable energy, and third would be ESG, which I will explain later on. First, the carbon signal for Korean industries are receiving at the moment starts from the National Plan for Climate Change, which was announced at the end of last year. That's the legal that MOE announced last year, and that's a 20-year plan to comply with climate change from national perspective, and it focused on implementing and assessing 2030 national roadmap for greenhouse gas reduction. So we are serious about that roadmap, keeping that roadmap and make all the stakeholders on track to reduce our greenhouse gas to 336 million tons by 2030. It's only 10 years ahead of that. We have to reduce that amount. The 3 sectors matter to reduce, to attain the target. The first one is industry sector, as you can imagine. And second is construction and building. And third is a power sector. And those are the main sectors I would say to attain the target. And the Korea, as I say, since we have energy-intensive industrial structure, the emission trading scheme, which covers power and industry, amounts to 70% of entire national the greenhouse gas emission. So we implemented as our effort to be green as a nation, that we started the emission trading scheme since 2017. So we do have 4 years of experience already, 5 years of experience already to put a price on carbon in that industrial structure. Sorry for a little bit busy slide, but that just shows actual data that of the carbon price for last 5 years and the amount of trade for last the 4 or 5 years. We started less than $10 per ton when we started the emission trading scheme in 2007, but now the price went up to $40, around $40 per ton, but now it's converging into $30 per ton. And we are one of the country which has highest the price of the carbon. That I think that reflects to the industrial structure again, which is pretty hard to reduce the 20-30% of greenhouse gas emission. For the carbon, the prospect, although we were pretty successful for last 4 years of operation of emission trading scheme, but we do have another important phase called phase 3 from next year. That's the 2021 to 2025, and that direction of that phase 3 was announced by the governmental agency last month. Direction here. So if you are interested in this specific things, you can just go through the old slides, but I'll just emphasize on the left-hand side of the column. The government is trying to reinforce the allocation scheme by sort of changing, by increasing the proportion of auction for next phase. And the government is also, for next phase, trying to activate market functioning financial institutions to trade. And the last one would be the flexibility that I think you are very interested in, that the flexibility to allow the international offset to be used for domestic compliance. The government just announced the direction to think about that the internet keep allowing international offset under Paris Agreement, the system. For the second half of this year, the Ministry of Environment will announce the allocation plan, which is the specific plan for next phase. You will just find lots of detailed one in August. And second, Korean industries are receiving is renewable energy from various stakeholders. The first signal comes from customer, as you can see from this chart. The Korean companies, LG, Samsung, and many other the big conglomerates are being asked by their European and US buyers, customers, to use renewable energy for their factory to make semiconductor or to make the battery to sell to the buyer. So that became reality. That pressure is being materialized, so that the companies are really trying to comply with that. And also the government is making the green price and making indirect PPA, so that the government is make sure that we have right enabling environment for companies to comply with their foreign buyers. The second signal within the renewable energy, second signal that Korean industries are receiving is, of course, that the governmental plan to expand the proportion of renewable energy. So, as you all know, a couple of years ago, Ministry of Industry of Korea announced the Renewable Energy 3020 plan, which expands the proportion of renewable energy generation from 10% to 20% within 10 years. And that's the I think that interested into hearing what happened after government announced that plan. Actually expanded, or was it just slow, or if I see if you just look at the very bottom of this, solar and installed capacity before the government announced that plan 2017, the entire capacity was cumulative. The capacity was 7 gigawatts, but 2018 alone, the government, in Korea, 2.6 gigawatt was installed, And in 2019, you cannot see the number because I'm hiding the number right now from the screen. The 2019, it's a 3.3 gigawatt was installed. Averagely, we install 3 gigawatt a year, solar and wind only. So we are on track to follow that and renewable energy, the plan that government. And the prospect for renewable energy, what's going to happen in the future? Last month, the Ministry of Industry called MOTI, they announced 9th basic plan for electricity. That's the legal-based plan again to sort of match supply and demand of electricity for next 15 years. The government announced very bold move. The plan proposes to decrease the coal-fired power plants from 60 units at the moment to 30 units within 15 years, and converting most of the power plants, coal-fired power plants, into LNG plants, and also add additional 20 gigawatt, which is the 1/5 of the entire the Korean the power capacity, will be added between 2030 to 2034. So that's a good the signals that the industry is receiving right now. And the last one is ESG. That's the signal from investors. Those who are not used to the term, the ESG, that's the environmental, social, and governance, and that's the ESG is non-financial factors considered for investors to decide the target company which the investors invest in, and to sometimes divest the investment as well. So the company disclosed the data, and rating agency ranked them, and then the investor using those rating and with its own policy, the investor engaged with the company to be more sustainable, to be more green, to be the ESG aligned. What does it got to do with Korean companies? We do have a lot of shareholders, foreign shareholders, so that matters. For example, the BlackRock, which sent a letter to all investees in January of this year, and asking those quote. So Samsung received that letter, LG received that letter, Naver received the letter. Some of the companies, we are helping them to comply with that request. That request matters. That unlike the carbon and renewable energy, this one is the agenda for boardroom. The carbon and renewable energy, that's the agenda for executives, but this is for CEO and board members. So it matters. The BlackRock specifically asked the companies to disclose their climate-related governance system, climate-related strategy, climate-related risk management system, climate-related target. So that's very specific, and all the companies who got investment from BlackRock should disclose that information within this year. So that's the first time that BlackRock sent a letter. So we do receive the signal, and as you know, the Korean companies are following that signals as well. Consequently, the Korean companies are issuing lots of ESG bonds. That's very exponential. That's one of the trends that we are actually following. This is my last slide. If you want to look at what's going to happen next, prospect for Korean industry on ESG, I think that you have to take a look at the National Pension Service. that all financial sector roads lead to national pension service. That's the biggest pension, the financial institution in Korea, and that it manages around $700 billion, and in Korean society, Korean financial sector, NPS invest, NPS assigns asset manager, and when NPS do, everybody else just follow. So if you just take a look at what National Pension Service will announce regarding climate change at the end of this year, if you just take a look at how they adopt their activation plan and how they activate actually shareholder activities, the others will follow. I think this ends my presentation. I'll just close my remark with just one just comment on Korean CEOs. I have frequently communicated with the Korean industries and CEOs, and like 2 years ago when I talked to them regarding carbon, renewable energy, ESG, I felt that they sort of received those kind of things as sort of luxury or CSR or voluntary things. But now I clearly see some difference because, as I said, because of those signals and some changes in the market. Thank you.
Saw online that there were some issues with the lapel microphone, so indeed we're holding them now. We're setting up for having a small panel discussion where our two speakers, Ambassador Reiter and Dr. Kim as well, will be joined by the Dutch Ambassador, Johanna Doornewaard, and Professor Yu, the Dean of the KDI, the Korean Development Institute School of Public Management. I think we're being set up for a socially distanced panel as well here. Can I ask you to come forward? Please join. You as well. So I thought that was actually very interesting to learn how the private sector perceives signals, including those Dr. Kim, Yuan, I think you have there were names on those chairs. Yeah, there's one left then. I don't know who picked. Yes, I think that's also perfectly fine. Although whoever put the stickers. So I thought that was very interesting. Thank you for that talk.
Sorry, the Marcel is also online. Still, okay. He's going to join the debate.
Ah, Marcel is still online. Can you hear us, Marcel? Can you say something? You're supposed to be online as well. So we're beginning with two short introductions from the two panelists that haven't spoken yet. So Joanne, I think you are first in introducing to us briefly the Dutch climate policy.
I have something to show. I have 4 slides on the Dutch policy that's coming right now. That's forward. Okay. I'm just going to stick behind you.
See, you're set up as technology, climate. Technology.
We'll get better as we do more of this. We'll get better as we do
more.
We'll
have to get used to
as we do more of these online talks.
This is a hybrid model.
Exactly.
It's a bit more advanced.
But it's sort of working. Joanne, you're on.
Here we are. Okay. I have we prepared 5 slides about the Dutch climate agreement. You might know that the Netherlands is a low-lying country. 30% of our country is below sea level. So climate change is very much in our minds because we are confronted with that for the last centuries already with the fight against the sea level. And I think all the schools, the children already, when they're young, they learn about the rising sea level and the importance of fighting climate change. So the awareness is there, but there's also the awareness that we cannot do it alone. I mean, we are just the Netherlands. We are the Netherlands. We are proud to be the Netherlands, but we know we cannot do that by ourselves. So we need alliances to work together to fight climate change. So that's why we are also internationally active, and we are contributing to the EU Climate Green Deal as well. I just want to show you a little bit the process. Let me just find out if it works. Where should I point? Yeah, there.
You can point anywhere. But, yep. So
here we go. Well, this.
sorry.
Next one.
Yep, you can do it for me. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just
sure.
4 slides. So the Dutch Climate Agreement has, it's really like a social agreement. It took quite some time to get to that. It had to be affordable, fair and feasible. And it ended up like we decided to reduce our CO2 emission to 49% in 2030 and 95% in 2050. And we will phase out coal in 2030. So then the next slide. To set up that process, right now I'm in the middle of these 5 sectors, but so we started a process of consultations with all the stakeholders in the 5 sectors. So electricity, mobility, agriculture, there's the built environment, and there is another one that's down there. Can I see that as well?
Can you hold the mic so that
I can hear it.
online
Can hear me as well? Okay. So we have electricity, mobility, agriculture, built environment, and the industry. So those are the 5 sectors. So we set up the climate tables, and each climate table had stakeholders at that table. And the criteria to be able to sit in that table is that, I mean, you had to be able to reduce emissions or enhance social support, or you would be able to provide knowledge and expertise in that certain sector, or you would have a mandate to make deals. So that was a process of a year and a half. And these tables were sitting together by themselves, discussing the ambitions. So it started, what kind of ambition do we have for our climate change in the future? And then with this ambition, they went back to Parliament to discuss that kind of ambition. Is it indeed feasible? Is it practical? And then even, I can have the next slide, to already calculate if it really would work. What would be the impact? So we have the assessors, our agencies, who calculated what kind of measure, what kind of impact it would have indeed on climate, the CO2 reduction. What would it cost? What would be the budgetary impacts? What would be our tax burden? And then it went back again to Parliament to discuss that. So it was a very participative process of involving a lot of stakeholders. And in the end, we came to that agreement. I can have the next slide, the last slide. With the program and the instruments that are in place right now. So we have a law, a climate law, defining our targets for 2030, 2050. And we have an agreement how we want to reach that. And this is the agreement that all the stakeholders signed up to. So just to mention 2 of them, in mobility, we have agreed right now that in 2030, 100% of all the cars, the new cars, will have 0 emissions. And we agreed that we will, by 2030, we will have 8.8 million charging points in the Netherlands. So you can imagine what kind of industry, how much investment is going into that, but also what kind of jobs will be going into that as well. And then, of course, the bikes. By public transport being a big thing, and to even make that smarter so that people will not even use their car. And then the other important sector in the Netherlands, agriculture. So, I mean, you might know we are the 2nd largest producer of agricultural goods in the world, after the US, in this small country, the Netherlands. So we are very efficient, but we also produce a lot. So we want to look into sustainable heating. We already do, but that will be further developed. There will be exploration how we can store the carbon in the soil and in vegetation. So there will be a lot of pilot programs, they're already ongoing, how we can do that. Processing of manure, how we can reduce the livestock emissions. So in all these sectors we have defined regulations that together the sector is working on. And that hopefully in the end it indeed will lead us to 49% of reduction in 2030 and 95% in 2050. I think that's in short a little bit that I wanted to tell you, and later on we can talk more in detail. Although I'm not a climate expert, I'm just the ambassador. But this is a process that, I mean, the main thing that I want to stress here is the participation of a lot of the stakeholders. So there's not that much of a discussion. This is accepted. It took years to get to this, and right now we agree. I mean, 2030 we will just have electric cars. And right now, I mean, the charging points are already coming up in all the neighborhoods, but there will be more points coming up as well. So there's no discussion like over here, okay, I would like an electric car, but I will not get that far. No, you will get that far. And we will do that together in Europe, so we will be able to travel if we have post-COVID it's possible to travel. So then indeed we will have the charging points as well along the highways in Europe. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. And you can see some of the milestones here: 49% reduction by 2030, 70% renewable energy. Those are, I think, milestones we all recognize from the discussion. 100% new cars. But there's also one that I would like to come back to in the discussion. You showed 95% reduction by 2050, so not quite net zero by 2050. So that, I think, is an interesting discussion for today. But I think first we'll have Professor Yu have a similar introduction of the Korean perspective, the Korean Green New Deal. Yes?
Yeah, you can do, otherwise I will be useful.
We'll have some similar milestones. Do you have a microphone? Maybe you have this one.
I don't have any slides because I have not prepared them.
The actual microphone is that one.
That's right.
Speak to that.
And also because one very conspicuous aspect of the Korean New Deal, which I have been asked to introduce, is the absence of milestones and specific targets about, going 100% electric cars or net zero or. So there has been a lot of criticisms on that, and also the money that the government announced the third supplementary budget last week, and a part of that was spending, I think 1.4 trillion won. I would have liked it to be trillion dollars or trillion euros, but it's trillion won. And but it's actually just a enumeration of sub-projects that are related to green cities and spaces and green industry, low carbon energy. There are no ambitious goals and targets. And so a lot of people said, the government is still interested mostly in creating jobs and economic recovery, and not really serious about climate change action. And also an important part of Green New Deal is supposed to be social equality, reducing inequality. On those fronts, the Korean New Deal package so far has been quite weak. And then, of course, European colleagues are very critical of the fact that we continue to build coal-fired power plants and finance such projects and do other things that are inconsistent with a serious Green New Deal. Nonetheless, let me say a few words in defense of the Korean Green New Deal. there's something called Korean New Deal. There are a lot of New Deals. That was announced, I think, the 22nd of April as part of the economic recovery package from the COVID-19 induced downturn. And the immediate reaction in the Korean stock market was, skyrocketing of the cement companies and construction companies. Their shares were skyrocketing, and there was a lot of people who are criticizing the Korean New Deal. What is this? Are we? You talked about, Ambassador. What did you say? Going back, or in my language, it's we should not be bouncing back to the past gray economy. We should be bouncing forward to a green economy. And after 20 days, that is, I think 12th of May, President Moon instructed the cabinet to include Green New Deal as part of the Korean New Deal. And I don't exactly know what happened in between, but I must say, to put it diplomatically, I was not getting encouraging signs from the government when I tried to advocate inclusion of Green New Deal. But somehow it worked. The president said that we should heed to the expectations from the international community, people like you, and also the wishes of the civil society and so on, and maybe some of the economic signals that Dr. Kim alluded to earlier. So I think it's a matter of whether we look at the half-filled glass and say it's half empty or half full. So the Korean New Deal, while quite unsatisfactory as it stands now, it's, I think, can serve as a good springboard on which Korean society can prepare to make a really big jump. And I must say a number of initiatives to strengthen and beef up the Korean New Deal program are underway in and around the government. And I'm also a part of that. And of course, it's very important to get the private sector, the businesses and the civil society involved in this process, and especially because it's only the real serious beginning of the change. And finally, let me just say that Dr. Kim mentioned that the CEO's reception, when you mentioned these environmental keywords, their attitudes are now changing, right? Perhaps the bureaucrats, they are even slower to change it. So I keep saying that because this is hosted by Green Growth Institute. I keep saying that the spirit of Green New Deal is, in the Korean society, a lot of people still think that when you talk about environment, climate, you are doing it at the expense of economy. But no. This is environment plus economy. That is the essence of Green New Deal. And after the initial success in containing the COVID epidemic, the Korean government has been talking about a leading, becoming a leading country. And I tell them, if you don't make a bold action and make a big change in terms of climate action, nobody is going to, consider you as a leading country. So that's my message to the Korean colleagues who are joining us here.
Very good. I think that really is a
good start of our discussion. So maybe let's do a socially distant half circle here. The question I'd like you to talk about a little bit, we don't have that much time left, but we do also have one more panelist who hopefully is with us still, Marcel Beukeboom. We can't see you, but hopefully we can hear you and you can hear us. You know, in light of what you have been explaining about the different New Deals, and of course, part of the campaign that we are organizing this under has a clear name around blue skies and net zero 2050, right? And we are discussing here net zero 2050. There's Marcel as well, as if it is something special. But if you look at the Paris Agreement, where all countries signed up to the Paris Agreement with a goal of 2 degrees and going to 1.5, you could say net zero 2050 is already built into the Paris Agreement. So countries implicitly have already signed up. So how difficult is it for the Netherlands to go from 95 to 100%, or how difficult is it for Korea to set a firm target in its coming NDC or before the end of the year when the NDCs have to be submitted? And maybe Marcel, you can speak for the Netherlands, but also as a climate envoy. How do you see the prospects of countries really making ambitious commitments and more countries joining the, yes, we can see you, the net zero 2050 target? Can I hand it to you first?
Yes, thank you, Frank. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right. First, on the 95%, you concluded that that is not the same as net zero. In fact, it is. Okay. We have concluded the agreement, as the ambassador said, to come to 95%, but we do that in the context of the agreements of the European Union. So there is a possibility to compensate, and in fact, several countries have done the same, and a country that is often seen as very ambitious, like Sweden, is even having a lower national target for 2050. So you have to see this in the bigger context, and that is something that I think we should or could also do globally, where countries also pledged to or signed for the climate neutrality in the second half of this century, as you alluded to in the Paris Agreement. We also agreed that we have to cooperate to get there, and that is, I think, an important aspect of it as well. And that means that in the years to come, and I think starting with the updated and enhanced NDCs, the new climate plans that all countries have to submit this year, but also with the COP next year, that we come to better plans and better cooperation to get there. And funding is an important part of that. The developed countries, so let's call them the G20, agreed to help developing countries to get to that target as well. And that is getting under stress, of course, in the current economic crisis. So reaching those financial targets will be key also to keep trust in the system and trust in the solutions that we signed for. And maybe as a final reaction, also to Dr. Yu, on new coal, very much agree with his analysis. And investing in new coal, in a way, is not a smart thing to do at the moment, given the carbon budget that is left, according to scientists. If we really do want to reach the 1.5 degree world as we have signed for, there is no space left in that carbon budget. So every investment in coal will lead to stranded assets. And that is, I think, something that any economist should be aware of. We need to look into different sources of different objectives of investment. And as a final conclusion, this is I think, a very good way of discussing this. And I'm in discussions with the ambassador as well to see how we can continue to cooperate with the Korean government, as this is key to a way forward. And I mentioned the Powering Past Coal Alliance, but I think that there are other ways to share knowledge and to share experiences, and also to invest in each other's economies to get there to a greener future. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. So thank you for that explanation. So the Netherlands has signed up to net zero 2050, 95% at home and partly compensating internationally, which is of course indeed very much a discussion that interests many developing countries who might be in the market for selling some of those carbon credits. And he raised a number of other interesting points as well. Of course, we keep coming back to the private sector. And Dr. Kim, in your presentation, you made it very clear it's the supply channels, you know, the value chains, the external buyers that can force Korean companies. It is international shareholders. When will the moment come that Korean companies sign up to RE100, or that they think it is in their best interest to make those commitments themselves, not only because their value chains ask it?
I think that right at the moment, the Korean companies are pretty much reacting to the value chain's pressure. But while they are reacting to their buyers, international buyers, they sort of, although the motivation was started from the international pressure, while they are trying to comply with those requests, they are also acknowledging some opportunities while they are complying with those pressure. So I don't know exactly when, but as the technology price goes down, and when as also enabling environment like the green pricing or indirect PPA, which is necessary for RE100 for Korean jurisdiction, I think that the Korean companies are getting more used to and more have more recognition of opportunistic of point out of that process, and that same thing can be applied to the carbon emissions. The first time the government started the carbon pricing emission trading scheme, which industry did not like. But as they just comply with that regulation, they also recognize some opportunity and also recognize some opportunistic points which they would never recognize unless they just participate in the program.
You've heard that so many times, right? Industry resists pollution taxes and so on, but as soon as they come into place, they find a way to turn that into a commercial opportunity. So sometimes regulation indeed can help industry move along. Now, Ambassador Ryder, for you, you have shown us wonderful examples of how the EU has its business sorted at home. I'm very curious how you, the EU, behave internationally, because one interesting point, of course, is it's one thing to not build any coal-fired power plants at home, but the other thing is, will you support any such projects internationally, or does the EU have rules in place not to support or export the old technology to the developing world? Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, one of the principles of foreign policy, and that would for me be part of foreign policy of the European Union, is that it is written in our treaty, in our constitution, that the foreign policy has to be in line with the values which we have internally. So that means we should not do it, and we are not allowed to do it. So that applies to the EU foreign policy, and that, as our member states make up the European Union, they are also part of this pledge. And we are using also foreign policy development programs in building in incentives. We might call them carrots. Be as green as you can, as quickly as you can, be as not polluting as you can, and then you get a reward. So the structure is basically the one which is the incentive structure. And the incentive structure is not only financial issues, but also working with the civil society. I have mentioned in my presentation that it is important how the market is reacting and demanding. But who is the market? It is very often consumers. And if you work with civil society, that they have, first of all, the right demand, and they also put pressure on companies to be green not only on nice, beautifully made brochures, which is often the contribution of the PR department of companies, that they have lived up to their obligations. If you have this pressure, I think then you can achieve something. And we are working with civil society, we are working with regional entities, with cities. We would like to have governors and mayors join our Green City Alliance. I think that all brings up pressure, and that's what we are also doing here in Korea. So I think there is a little bit of a push necessary, and we have heard about the fine dust. The fine dust, I think, gave a push, because, as I said, I mean, I learned to wear a mask because of fine dust and not because of the virus. Do we want it? No.
Thank you. And indeed, you indicate how consumers can play a role in the decisions they make with their wallet when they shop. But of course, we've also heard how important the pension funds are, and of course we consumers own those pension funds, so it's very important to give signals as consumers, I think, through the pension funds. And in Denmark, for instance, the pension funds are very willing to invest in green. In Korea, we heard a bit that they might be going there in the future as well. Professor, I know you've so far been sticking to the facts and been observing what's going on, but are you willing to look in the crystal ball a little bit and tell us whether you think when those new parliamentarians that were elected in the last election, when they get to parliament, is there a chance that we will get something like a net zero target or other targets that are so far missing in the coming parliamentary cycle?
Well, let me take a look at my crystal ball.
Yeah. It's half full.
I don't see. Well, I am hopeful. I wouldn't say optimistic, but I'm hopeful that we can begin to make significant progress from now on. I mentioned that there are a number of initiatives to strengthen the Korean New Deal program underway, and one of those in which I am involved is supposed to be reported to the president, and we've been holding discussions, online discussions like this, Zooming and so on, for a number of times, and that document has been evolving, and it was yesterday we have decided to put net zero by 2050 in there as a target. So that doesn't mean that the government is ready to take it, but we were, we had to think about, if the people up there think that this is radical, totally unrealistic document, then we lose all our efforts. So we have to be careful, how much. But we decided let's give it a push. That I think tells something, and there is many lawmakers are now interested in this, and the businesses. Seems to be a significant change, and I was not really thinking about the role of, potentially very important role of NPS. Now that I learned it, I'll do what I can. And also, let me just say that since we have ambassadors from Europe, one of the things that I tell the government is that Korea is in a very difficult situation diplomatically because of the rising tension or conflict between the U.S. and China, and we are right in the middle. And well, we have to figure out how to, keep good relations with both of these superpowers. But in that difficult situation, if you have a nice friend somewhere else that you can count on, like EU, that will be helpful. And to be really good, on good terms with European countries, we really have to do better in this area. So with all these things working together, maybe the crystal ball says, you can be slightly more optimistic than before.
Well, at least it's very good to hear from you both, from sort of the government and policy side and the private sector, that there is movement, that this subject is very much in discussion at the
exactly.
table.
Yeah, evolving.
And that also means that things like our campaign have value to be part of those discussions. Indeed, Joanne, as our host of this afternoon, as our organizer, I thought I'd give you the last words.
Yes, well, very encouraging to hear. I mean, but sometimes you have to be ambitious. You have to have this focus, and I think also the companies will need that. I mean, they have to invest. So if you know there's this target, that also future governments, there's a legislation in place that you will reduce your emissions. So you have to find a way, but you have to give them some kind of a guidance, some consistency. So I think it's very important to have those kind of targets in the future. And it's just one thing that we did not mention to reach those goals as well, is to have the participation of your society, of your people in your country. And then one thing is energy saving, to be smart. I mean, you have all the technicalities here. You're so advanced here in Korea. So you have so much assets to help you as a citizen to play your role yourself. Because you mentioned right now we want to be friends with Europe, so we do the target. No, it should come from your people as well, that you want to contribute to a better world. So it should be also with information at schools. If you want to have a good future, if you want to continue to have blue skies, you have to play a role. It starts with yourself as well. So it should be something that you have to do together. I mean, the government has to play a role, but we all have to play a role.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a little bit what I wanted to say.
Those are good last words, good passion. I think we've seen a lot of passion from all our speakers and panelists this afternoon. I think we probably have to wrap it up, given the time. I have not actually seen if there were important questions online.